Hi everybody, good afternoon and thanks so much for joining us today, where for the next hour or so we're going to discuss what we recommend as cost-effective ways to increase donations at your next fundraising event. My name is Daniel Law. I'm head of sales at Givergy US, and we also have Harry Santaolalla, MC and fundraising consultants, both based out of New York City. So do ignore the accents, Harry.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, we are indeed both based here in New York, where it is another stunning November day, and I see we've got quite a few participants here based in the US, and a handful over the pond back in Her Majesty's capital, which is great, and welcome to all the attendees. And yeah, we're looking forward to sort of breaking down some of the most cost-effective ways to maximize donations at your events, predominantly via sort of pledge drives or funder needs.
Fantastic. So firstly, throughout the presentation, please do tweet us with any thoughts and questions you may have. Our handle is at GivergyUS with the hashtag #RaisingMore, in addition to the chat function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We will have a quick Q&A section at the end of the webinar if you prefer to wait, and we are also recording it for anyone that isn't able to get this time slot. So on the agenda today, what we're going to cover, what we feel makes a good MC and the qualities we recommend to look out for, tips to communicate your goal effectively, how to create a competitive environment, and also how to target or engage what we call the silent majority. Now, as Harry said, there is quite a few names that we do recognize, so welcome, and apologies if this next slide is a spiel that you've heard from me before. But just as a bit of background into Givergy for anyone who's unaware, we are a fundraising technology company. Our global hub is in London. We also have offices throughout Canada, Hong Kong, Australia, and 2 here in the US of A. We've raised in excess of $55 million in the past 12 months, supporting more than 1,500 events globally for more than 1,200 incredible causes. So to open, just to get an idea of where everyone's at, we wanted to start with a quick poll just to see how fundraising is typically handled amongst all of you. So I know it's called a million different things there: pledge drive, funder needs, what have you. So you should see a box pop up with this poll. Have you ever operated a pledge drive before? Now I'll give a few moments just for those results to come in, just to see.
This is also to see who's actually still with us. So yeah, please do get involved. Have you operated a pledge drive or funder need at your event? And just sort of get a feel for where we're at, sort of who we're talking to, and how popular these drives are. They are much more popular here in the US, so it'll probably be above 50%. But let's see what the results yield.
There we are. So as expected, it does reflect what we found. They do tend to be more popular on this side of the pond, as we can see that with the 72% of the audience that are already using them. So hopefully, you'll find today that the next sort of 55 minutes or whatever we have, some of the tips that we find to make the most effective for operating a pledge drive. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Harry, who's going to take you through the next part of the presentation. So, Harry, you host a lot of these pledge drives and funder needs, call for cash. So, do you find that there's sort of processes that you go through to make them most effective? What do you find works for you?
Yeah, I think, firstly, that statistic was really quite an interesting one, because we hosted a relatively similar sort of webinar back in the UK, and that initial question was posed to the audience, and it was under 50%, and so close to sort of 3/4 of you already operating a pledge drive is is fantastic. I personally believe it should be on the top of the agenda for almost every run of show. I really do. I can't imagine, a fundraising event without some form of ask in it. So it's nice to see that on this side of the pond, people do identify that it's a really good opportunity to engage your audience and get a little something from everyone. And I guess, my process is always the same. It's to, get to know an organization, and, most importantly, to do the research. It's just like absolutely anything in life. The more research you put in, and the more you, the more time and effort you spend, planning and preparing yourself for your fundraising campaign, in which the pledge drive or fund of need is often a key part, the better the results will yield. It really is that simple, and there's a whole host of ways in which you can maximize your return, but research is absolutely key in making sure that you're going into your event or your fundraising evening or golf day or whatever it is as best prepared as possible, so that you can really execute a strong fundraising campaign. Very often that begins with just, white canvassing, starting from scratch, working out what it is that your event is targeting. What type of an audience do you have? What is your guest demographic? Every single event is unique. Every single fundraising event certainly has the same intention and that's to not just raise as much as humanly possible, but to try and get as much audience participation as possible. And that, for me, is the real measurement of a successful campaign. So, Dan, as you rightly say, I've been fortunate to work with a huge amount of organizations, certainly over the last 12 months. A lot of the focus has been on these pledge drives, and some of these organizations are some of the, the biggest, most recognizable names over here in the US and indeed globally. And some of them are just small organizations that are local schools or what have you. But every single one of them has a unique guest demographic. They have a unique message that they want to relay to the audience, and they have different runs of shows. So it's our role as fundraising consultants and event planners and so on and so forth to make sure that we are as best prepared as possible. And one of the first questions I always pose is, what is your guest demographic? So let's say, for example, your typical gala dinner, realistically, and this is quite an interesting stat, realistically, over 70% of a typical gala dinner is formed of guests that have not paid to even be in the room. So that means that these are guests of some of the sort of more established or some high net worth individuals who purchase tables, or sponsors, or what have you. They are very generous usually to organizations that they're very connected with, and they'll often purchase tables. So 9 out of the 10 people on these tables haven't even purchased tickets to be there, which is absolutely fine. But they are a key target for a pledge drive. And one of the most important things we're trying to do is to ensure that we engage them during your event enough to allow them to part with some cash, whether it is hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, or even just $50 to say thank you for having me. The goal of a successful pledge drive is to make it fun, engaging, tasteful, but most importantly, inclusive. So not only do you get a huge amount of audience participation, but most importantly, when people are leaving the event and you've hit your goal, you have a much higher percentage of the audience that are leaving feeling like they've done their bit. And that, for me, is absolutely key, because when people are engaged and they've done their bit, whether it's $50 or $50,000, you have an audience that leaves having been engaged, and therefore are more likely to remain engaged with your organization moving forward. So again, for me, one of the key points to really stress is I do not measure the success of a fundraising event just purely on what is raised the night of. I very often will have targets placed in front of me for a fundraising drive or what have you, but for me that number is just a financial target which we should be hitting. because we've planned and strategized a target that's fair and reasonable. It's audience appropriate. But most importantly, I measure the success of a pledge drive on how engaged the audience is. What percentage of the audience has given to hit that target? Because realistically, you can have a handful of very wealthy individuals make sure a target gets hit. But if 90% of the audience is leaving having not spent anything, in my opinion, I chalk that up as a loss. So one of the key things we'll look at is not just the guest demographic. So the guest demographic might be, do you have a lot of sort of financiers? Do you have a lot of, audience who are guests of key individuals? If it's a school, then, you're likely to have a very engaged audience. 80, 90% of the audience will be parents. Or alumni or what have you. They are a much more engaged audience and are far more likely to have, invested in being at the event. But more importantly, they are also more emotionally invested in the organization. So a much easier sell, as it were. But what I also love to do is to analyze past event data. Now, the past event data really, really spells out a story to you. It gives you a real, strong sense of, obviously how well audiences have performed in the past, but it gives you a sort of financial narrative, as it were. It lets you can really sort of break down, how successful drives have been in the past. When were they most successful? So when did you place the drive? Was it during was it during the beginning of a show when the audience is super engaged? Was it midway through the program? Was it before or after honorees? Was it a climactic ending to the event? Which, in my opinion, is one of the biggest mistakes organizations make, is they will put their pledge drive right at the end as some sort of climactic finish, and now we're going to hit our target and everyone can feel great and they can leave with that sense of sort of accomplishment, when the reality is the final third of an event, unfortunately, we have to just face facts. By the final third, people have either consumed a few too many glasses of wine and are less engaged, and therefore more engaged with the people to their left or right or on their table, or logistically speaking, a lot of them are trying to beat the traffic. They're trying to work out how they can get the Uber before their neighbors. They're working out how much they owe the babysitter in cash. They're working out what they're going to wear for their meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. and unfortunately we've lost their attention. So for me, analyzing the data of previous events, where in the runner show did we have pledge drives, how long did they last for, and then most importantly, how engaged was the audience? What percentage of the audience gave during pledge drives in previous years? And if you have a comparable event approaching, then you can actually start strategizing. Well, last year, 20% of the audience gave. We raised $80,000. It took 10 minutes and it was, towards the tail end of the event. Bring it forward, apply some technology, and I would thoroughly encourage you to utilize the Givergy pledge platform. As an MC that drives a lot of these pledges, I can hand on heart say that it is by far and away the most effective tool when it comes to pledge drives. Bring it forward in your run of show and then challenge the audience. Utilize, the data that's there and challenge them to double the audience participation, or, even a 30% increase in audience participation, which should lead to another $20,000 or so on and so forth. So you've actually strategized going into the event, and then you can execute, during the night of. And for me, all of that hard graft, all of that hard work is done prior to the event. It's done with, meticulously going through previous event data and then analyzing who is forming the audience this year. Honorees make a massive impact. Do you have honorees that are going to be bringing, let's be honest, are they bringing something to the table? Are they bringing some of their sort of big clients or some of their finance crew to the table, or is the honoree going to be someone who's more, I don't know, maybe on the creative side. Well, the reality is that's going to have an impact on the levels of gifts made by their guests. So these are all things that we're all aware of, but it's important to talk about them prior to the event. And then, bottom line is executing, that pledge drive the night of is all about having the right MC.
Yes, absolutely. And I can, there's some very interesting points there. Whenever a client comes to us, the first question they have is, is their target reasonable and is it attainable? So it sounds, your process is making it more engaging and making sure, the two will sort of take care of themselves, if that sounds right. Yeah, absolutely. So what makes a good MC? So, I mean, what qualities, do you look out for? Is there certain things that you find work, certain things you find clients tend to do that you recommend they wouldn't? What do you think works for you?
Yeah, I think for me, that there is a huge difference between an MC and an entertainer or a comedian or a musician. I think very often in my experience, and to be honest, one of the reasons I got into what I do in terms of driving these pledges on stage was born out of frustration of being at events and seeing that, very often the messaging gets muddled up, or the instructions on how to give, or what, how to utilize technology, or even just, going through the increments of a pledge drive, if it is an incremental pledge drive. I saw so many of them get it wrong, and I realized that a lot of the times the mistake is that, companies or organizations, charities, will often employ the services of an entertainer to deliver the pledge drive, which doesn't actually make sense, because there is a massive difference. That entertainers or musicians or celebrities, they are all incredibly talented in their own field, but that doesn't make them effective fundraisers. And time again, I've seen comedians or actors, actresses, and so on, fall flat when it comes to the fundraising aspect, because they don't quite deliver the message in the right way, or they haven't actually given the instructions at the right time. And why should they? The reality is that's not their profession. They aren't professional fundraisers, so it doesn't actually make sense to employ them to do that. Absolutely utilize them as part of the program and get some fantastic content in the program, but it is worth investing in the right MC that's going to deliver the actual fundraising portion, and it shouldn't take too long. What makes a good MC when it comes to fundraising is someone who can keep the audience entertained and keep them on side, and deliver a clear message in line with the brand of the event, but most importantly can actively encourage the audience to engage with the pledge drive. Make it clear that this is an all-inclusive moment. It's no longer a spectator's sport, especially when you have things like Givergy at the event, where everyone and anyone can come in at any level and feel like they're doing their part. Their names can flash up on the screens. You can have leaderboards of the most active tables. All of those types of things allow a strong MC to really engage with the audience and make sure that you're driving as much audience participation as possible, and leave all of the singing and dancing and so on and so forth to the trained professionals, who are professional actors and musicians and so on and so forth. There's actually quite a good example of this quite recently. Was an event I was fortunate enough to support in Philadelphia recently. It's called Philly Fights Cancer. It was their 3rd year, and we had a hugely ambitious goal of raising $2 million in the pledge drive, and that was based on all the stats we had analyzed prior to the event. It was 2,000 audience. They had raised close to 1.2 the previous year, and they had one large donation going into it. So it was all strategized, but it was still a massively ambitious goal. We knew we needed close to 800 pledges to make it happen. They were fortunate enough to have Whoopi Goldberg present the whole event, which was incredible. And then John Legend, did his thing for an hour as well on the piano, and it was absolutely stunning. But what they didn't do was rely on those two incredibly talented performers, they didn't rely on them to deliver the fundraising drive, because they recognize it's worth investing in the right MC to actually deliver that message and focus on a 10, 12, or even 15-minute drive to really bring home the most important part of the event, the fundraising. And it worked perfectly. You know, we hit 2.1 million. There were 890 unique pledges made. The audience was absolutely on side. Everyone had a huge amount of fun. And then, you know, I exit, and on comes John Legend and does the thing that he does best, which is sing songs and play the piano and look amazing. So job well done. And, you know, yes, not all events are going to raise millions, but that's all relative. It's all about what is fair and reasonable to ask of your audience, strategizing going in, and then making sure that each person who's going to be on stage is actually focused on delivering their role, whether it's presenting people, honoring people, giving acceptance speeches, you know, playing the piano, or delivering the pledge drive. Everyone has their role to play. And for me, you know, when it comes to driving that pledge, you've got to be inclusive. No MC should ever bully an audience into giving. No one should feel like, you know, no matter how much dispensable income they have, they should never feel bullied into giving. It should be a fun, engaging, tasteful moment whereby everyone, no matter what level they're coming in at, feels included. I think when it comes to, you know, how can the MC encourage donations? Again, you know, I don't want to sort of, you know, repeat myself too much, but making sure that the audience is aware that the message tonight is not just about engaging the people who can give tens of thousands or thousands of dollars. You know, the message really is, you know, tonight it's all about, you know, interaction, everyone feeling part of this pledge drive and making the most of that 8 to 12 minute pledge drive. So if you're utilizing Givergy, for example, one of the things I like to do is actually call out as and when people are coming in with donations, no matter what level they're coming in at. When it's flashing up on the screen, I think it's fantastic that people feel like it's their duty to give, you know, even if it's just $50. You know, you want to make it an environment where people feel encouraged to do their bit, and they feel recognized that even if it is just at a lower level, you know, it all really, really does count. And then, you know, for me, making sure that your MC has as much data as possible live, that's you know, that's a massively important part of the whole process. And this is now, the planning's been done, we've got the ball rolling, we're now in the actual sort of drive itself. This is a really key part of the event.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what sort of data do you find that tends to work for you? I mean, what do you recommend clients sort of brief the MC on? I mean, is it live data? Is it past data? What sort of do you find works for you best?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're feeding data to an MC, you know, it's so valuable to have stats at your fingertips, because, you know, in the past when we're doing sort of paddle raises, you know, one of the things about a paddle raise is you don't actually have, you don't know exactly how much has been raised right there in that moment. You've got to gauge roughly, and often I'll be tallying at different increments how much has been brought in and so on and so forth. But it's very hard to actually know, right, how many people have actually given so far? What's the actual total? Where are we at? How close are we to the target? That sort of thing. So when you're utilizing Givergy, or if you are able to have these stats live, which, you know, one of the best parts of, you know, the back end of the Givergy system is allowing you to see, okay, right, so we've had 112 donations so far, and there's 400 people in the room. So there's about 288 potential donations to come in. And for me, I absolutely love to have that. I can make it clear to the audience, right, so far, you know, 25% of you have got involved in the pledge drive, which is amazing, because we are 80% there towards the target. But if you have given so far, your job is not quite done, because if you've given, statistically, the people to your left and to your right haven't yet. So can you pick up the tablet and just quickly teach them how to make a donation? I also love the idea of feeding data, not just to the MC, but also to the audience. I like to, about halfway through a pledge drive, if I'm working with Givergy, I like to present the leaderboard for the number of pledges made per table. And that for me is a really awesome stat, because it's not, Givergy does have the ability to present how much has been raised per table, but I personally think that's a little bit crude. I much prefer to have number of pledges per table.
Yeah, so I mean the pledge drive, I mean, there is that sort of sense of provider that goes along, especially when they're in the paddle race format. I mean, all this live data that you're getting, specifically the pledges per table. I mean, have you seen that being used in a competitive way? Like, do you think that helps to spark that bit of competition within the pledge drive itself?
Absolutely. I think it's great, and I think actually, displaying goals and to the guests is absolutely key, and challenging them. Really challenging the guests, to compete. It's a healthy competition. It's a fun competition. It's not about, I'm not suggesting you utilize the number of pledges, sorry, the amount raised per table, because as I said, I think that can be a little bit too crude. But certainly make the most of number of pledges per table, challenge the room to get as 100% participation, and broadcast which of the which of the tables has been most active. And I've often seen at events, clients reward guests and tables with a bit of an incentive. Let's say, for example, Moet Chandon might be sponsoring an event. Very often I'll say, the first 3 tables that have 100% participation will receive a magnum of Moet. And bang, all of a sudden and as long as you set the system to to have a minimum donation of $40, $50, or whatever you think is reasonable, then you're guaranteed that if a table has hit 100% participation, they've already spent $500 or $1,000 or whatever it is. And so you can really be strategic on how you deliver that message, and how you can sort of gamify this idea of making the pledging fun and all inclusive. And yeah, I've seen that at a number of events, and I personally love it. There's a competitive element to me, which that really draws on. And again, it's not rude, it's not crude, it's not talking about dollar amounts. We're just talking about participation. And the bottom line is, everyone should be giving something. It doesn't matter, even if they've given, even if they've bought their ticket to be there, which the vast majority of guests actually haven't done. Everyone should be doing their bit. And that for me, the pledge drive moment is absolutely key to getting that right.
Interesting, yeah. So I mean, obviously we spark that competition between the table itself. I mean, do you find, is there any other tips that you have within that competition? I mean, can you create that competitive element in the room itself?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's combining all of the things we've discussed earlier. Having an MC that knows what they're doing from a fundraising perspective. You can even let them know how many pledges were made the previous years, and challenge them to make more pledges, not just challenging them to raise more money, but challenging the audience to be more engaged. You can have these healthy competitions of rewarding tables that have the most amount of participation. Gamifying it. There's all sorts of ways to motivate tables to work together as a team. But for me, one of the things I love about a pledge drive with the Givergy system is very often we will only have 3 tablets per table of 10, and some clients say, well, is that enough? Don't we need 1 tablet per person? But actually, the reality is, having 3 per table, it's for me as an MC, it's a dream, because you can use that as a way of making people engage with each other, which is kind of what you want as a fundraiser or an event operator or something. You want your audience to engage with each other. You want them to get to know each other. very often these guests may not know each other, and Givergy is kind of a nice segue into those introductions and to sort of that feeling of togetherness is something you want from tables, because people enjoy themselves more when they get going. They enjoy themselves more when they hit targets. They enjoy themselves more when they get rewarded. All of these things are not just about fundraising. It's about bringing the whole table together, and that for me is one of the most important aspects of an evening of fundraising, celebrating the whole idea of people working together, and that's why I love it personally. I think one of the areas that we've sort of touched on briefly is engaging that silent majority as well, and just to sort of clarify, the silent majority is they are that dreaded black hole in your balance sheet. They are the silent majority of the people that arrive at your event having spent nothing to be there. They are immediately an overhead, and sadly, very often they will leave having spent nothing. And the last 7 years of experience has taught me, if I were facing some of you right now, or probably all of you who's on this webinar, you will all be nodding your head furiously, trying to work out how we can get these people to spend some money. And in my experience, the bottom line is these aren't people who aren't willing and able to give. They don't turn up and just sort of have a party, indulge in the food and the wine and the entertainment and this, that, and the other, and leave having spent nothing. They don't do that because they aren't wanting to give or not in a position to give. And certainly anyone who comes to your event is in a position to give $50 or $100. It's just that in the past, either A, it hasn't been asked of them, or B, it has been asked of them, but in a really uninspiring way. And that could be, for me, the bane of all. I just can't stand seeing pledge cards on tables. No one fills out pledge cards. Even if you ask, the only people that are going to be delivering pledge cards are what we call, or certainly I identify as emotional pledges. So when you categorize your audience, and this goes back to planning and preparation, and the preparation that goes in pre-event, you need to identify two types of pledges. 20% of the audience, typically a smaller proportion, usually around about 20%, are going to be pledging emotionally. And those emotional pledges are typically higher net worth individuals. They're much bigger donations per person. But those are emotional pledges made by people who are linked to the organization. They might have been a supporter for years. They might have personal reasons why, but they are going to give regardless. They really are. And it's the job of the MC and the event creators to make sure that they give as much as possible. So you want to try and make the most of that demographic. But the reality is the real value out of a pledge drive is the other 70 or 80% of the audience who, let's be honest, are not as emotionally involved with the organization. And yes, they might be sort of inspired to give on the back of a successful sort of program that night, or some moving videos, or just clear messaging about how important the revenue is. But realistically, they are still in the other category of pledge, which is what I term a transactional pledge. So you have a period of time, usually about 8 or 10 minutes, where you need to get a transaction from them. And in the past, unfortunately, pledge cards just aren't enough. It's not inspiring enough. No one, part of the reason people like to give is they enjoy the sort of that moment where their name's flashing up on the screen, or they can put their hand up, or what have you. That part of that recognition, it's just not there if you're just leaving pledge cards on the table and asking people to give. And again, it's not that they're not willing and able to, it's just you're not making it fun and engaging enough for them to do so. That's why having the technology and utilizing all of the things we talked about earlier with the Givergy system, that's why having it is so important, because it doesn't matter what level you're coming in at, your name's flashing up and you feel part of that percentage that's being broadcast of people that have given. And when you utilize what percentage of the audience is given, and you're making it clear on a massive screen, if you are one of the 65% that is given, you feel part of the whole process, part of the event. You feel part of this sort of movement of good that evening. If you are on the other side of the fence and you're part of the 35% that hasn't given, you know, utilizing that leaderboard, that screen, getting an MC to make it clear that, you know, that silent majority shall no longer leave having spent nothing. You know, if you're on that 35%, you should be more encouraged to give at that stage and get your name up on the screen. So engaging the silent majority is absolutely key to a successful pledge drive, and very often they are the difference between, in my opinion, a not just financially successful drive, but a successful drive. They are the difference, you know, between, you know, what percentage of the audience gave last year, and then the next year, the silent majority are the people that can make that difference. And that is our role. That's our biggest challenge as fundraisers, is to try and engage that silent majority and get that transactional pledge. And the great news is, even though they might have a tenuous link to the organization, they might have even just been invited that morning, who knows? The great news is, if you get a transaction out of them that night, $50, $100 or what have you, it also means you've got their data. And so you can then hit them up the following days and try and get them engaged and try and move them into the emotional pledges in the years to come. You know, people who are tied in with the organization and actually want to learn about how the money's being spent. And I think I've, you know, more or less covered a lot of this slide of how you can increase participation at all the different levels. You know, that really is that whole idea of categorizing your audience into different segments, of not just how much dispensable income they have or how tied to the organization they are, but really executing a very clear and consistent message and pledge drive, you know, and then building a system that's going to work for you. So, you know, like I mentioned, there's several different, you know, slides or leaderboards, as Givergy calls them. You know, there are several different platforms that you can utilize. You've got to strategize which is going to be most appropriate for your audience. So that for me is really important. And then, yeah, we're sort of coming to the tail end of the presentation, but please do keep the questions firing in, because we've got a number of questions already in that we're going to be answering, and you know, I think it's really important to try our best and you know, get through as many of them as possible.
Absolutely, and you know, that as Harry mentioned, that silent majority really is something that we see time and time again, especially with the big corporate sponsors that so many of these charity events do sort of bring in, and it does sort of tie quite nicely into this. And just sort of a very quick anecdote from me is, I think, you know, when you do make those, you do have those different levels and different increments that people can donate to. You know, you have the higher ones that you know the major donors are going to give at, but also having those lower donation amounts that, if you can make it very personal to the organization and just show just how far that donation is going to go. I mean, I personally think it makes a massive difference in helping that participation rate get as high as it possibly can. And I've seen it work very well, especially at Charity Water last year, for example, where they you could give $30 and give someone clean water for life, and you know, that is such a small figure to go so far. So, I mean, that's something that I do think works very well, is making it very personal. And I mean, well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you've got the message is coming from the organization or the CEO or whoever the representative is up on the screen. They are communicating how important the revenue is, how much it means, you know, to the organization, you know, where the dollars are going in the field, so on and so forth. And that's a really, really important part. And then the MC can deliver the sort of, we are all in it together now, and we now have to drive home this pledge amount, because, you know, for all of those great reasons we've just had explained to us by the representative who's on stage from the organization. And as you can see in that picture, I tend to do the Jack from the Titanic move. That for me is a nice strong way of making it clear to everyone that this is our moment to make it happen.
I'm not sure you pull it off quite so well. I'm completely honest. I wouldn't have cast you over him, but leave that for another discussion.
Stop it. Yeah, Leo wins. Okay, so we're, like I said, we're sort of nearing the end of the seminar. I hope it has been really, really useful. And, you know, we do have some questions to answer shortly. But before we do...
Yeah, so we thought just to sort of round back and see, we'd redo this poll just to see sort of if any impact it had. And I think Harry mentioned at the start to make sure you're all still with us. So wanted to just run this poll one more time. Obviously, exactly the same procedure as last time. So you should now have that box pop up. So I'll leave a few minutes just for that to come in.
So we're essentially just asking, would you now consider implementing a strategic pledge drive? Yes, no, or unsure. We were around about 70% had not had a pledge drive prior to this webinar. Hopefully we've encouraged more of you to do so, and the results will be in very shortly. And the poll is filling up nicely. You are all still with us, which is lovely.
Great results as well. So, you know, that's exactly what we want to see. So now 93% say they consider implementing a strategic pledge drive. So, which is fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah, you've got a few pointers from today.
Great. So you 93% say yes. I still want to speak to the 7% that said no. I don't know what more we need to do. So it really is, for me, it is an absolute no-brainer. Pledge drive should be part of absolutely every single fundraising event, even if it's just a few minutes, to give everyone an opportunity to part with something to say thank you. And I think we're now on to a few questions. So keep those questions firing in. And yeah, what is the first question?
Let's have a look. Let me just see on this. I can open the box.
So the first question coming in is, which question should we go for? From Sasha. How often should you run a pledge drive throughout an event? Actually, I mean, to be honest, I personally prefer just having one succinct drive. You know, I have, obviously, I've seen a number of events where they have 2 drives, even 3. And, you know, to varying degrees of success. But for me, I personally like to have just one moment. You're making it clear to the audience that you have, you know, a pledge drive coming up. We want maximum participation, and then we can crack on with dinner or dessert or whatever stage you're at in the run of the show. But making it clear to them, we're not going to be bombarding you with an ask. This is the moment to give. We've got 8 minutes to do it. We've got a target of 100 grand, so let's collectively all do our bit, and then we can move on with the rest of the program. So I personally am a firm believer of one-off pledge drive in each event. But I have seen it successfully. You know, I have also seen it where pledge drives have been utilized at the tail end of events to try and sweep up any more donations. And again, utilizing the stats of how the first drive went, you can sort of, you know, try and nudge people closer to a round number. So say you're on $86,000, you might want to do a quick push towards the end of the event and say, look, we're on $86,000, which is great, and over half of you have given, but you know, there are still 40% out there who haven't given, and with an extra 14 grand, we can walk away with $100,000. So that's like a nice way to utilize the stats. So very often I'll say to a client, you know, just have that in the run of show, just as a just in case. But my gut is to try and stick with one.
Fantastic. So we've got a couple more that just come in. So this is one that I've seen with quite a few different aspects of fundraising, even actually. But how long do you recommend the pledge drive should last? I mean, do you find that it changes with targets, or do you have a distinct amount of time that you think works well?
No, I don't think it should change depending on the size of the target. again, it should be fun, it should be engaging, it should be tasteful, it should be all these things, but most important, it should be efficient. You know, let's be honest, it is that moment of the event where you're grappling with keeping the audience on, you know, on side and engaged throughout the whole of it. Keep it short, sharp, and succinct. Like I say, 8 to 12 minutes is more or less the most amount of time you need. But again, it does also depend on the type of pledge drive. You can have an incremental pledge drive, or you can just have a direct ask where you're asking people to just give what they can. I personally much prefer a direct pledge drive. And if you are going to have an incremental drive, you know, sorry, I much prefer having an incremental drive, not just an ask and you know, see what happens. I like to have the incremental starting at a high number. Always make sure you have 1 or 2 plants at the highest level, because the one thing you do not want is crickets on that sort of opening gambit. Do we have anyone who's able to come in at 10,000? No? Okay, well, we've just fallen flat on our face. We don't want that. We want the audience to feel inspired, to feel elevated, and so make sure that that's part of your planning. So for me, yeah, an incremental drive is more effective, but it should never last more than 10, 12 minutes. It does not need to be pulling teeth.
Sure. So I think we'll just go through the 2 more. So penultimate question, I think it sort of ties back in, I think that they both sort of tie back in with those table leaderboards and participation leaderboards that we've gone through. So I mean, do you think it's worth pinpointing those that they haven't given? Be it, you know, the table, I suppose, that the table that's got the least number of pledges and challenging them, or do you think it's worth focusing more on those higher and creating a bit of competition between maybe the top 3 or top 5 tables?
Yeah, again, I don't believe in lamenting people for not giving, and each tables will have various reasons why they can or can't give. And that's not, you know, sometimes you might have tables of guests who are part of an organization who are being rewarded for the hard work they've been, or tough times they've been through to you know, there are a whole host of reasons why they're there. And so we don't want to be sort of lamenting people for not getting engaged. Hopefully your MC has done a strong enough job at making it clear that it really, you know, everyone should be doing their bit. But no, I don't think you should be sort of, you know, pointing it out if people haven't given. That's up to them. It's a personal decision to make, and you know, I personally love it when an organization has a huge amount of participation, and specifically if we've executed a plan that I'm just sort of smiling to myself thinking about the Teach for America in DC. You know, that was a really fantastic drive earlier this year, because you know, in previous years they had good participation, but it was all at high levels, and you know, I think it was maybe 100 pledges made out of 500 guests, and you know, utilizing the screens and Givergy and so on and so forth, you know, making the whole pledge drive more fun and engaging. You know, it led to hundreds more donations, and a lot of them were coming from the teachers themselves at the back of the room. You know, a lot of them were coming from these teachers who work in state schools, and you know, they may not have the same levels of dispensable income as the front row tables, but it allowed them the opportunity to get involved, and you know, donations were flooding in at $25, $50, $100, and yes, it doesn't sound like much, but when you add them all up, it's a massive difference. Massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And so the final question that we do have is, well, so we've given quite a few, what I say, high-profile examples, some of the larger pledge drives that we host, and obviously we do see this as a fundraising avenue that will help, you know, any sort of charity event. And this question sort of does stem from that. What prizes would you recommend for a competition between the tables, keeping in mind that we're trying to keep costs down? Obviously not every charity is lucky enough to be sponsored by Moe or whoever. So, I mean, do you have any prizes that you've seen work well as to spark that bit of competition?
Well, the bottom line is, you know, you need to be as resourceful as you possibly can, and that's more or less what fundraisers are. You know, they are incredibly resourceful, and you know, it's not about cutting corners; it's about saving costs, and you know, that whole resourcefulness is, you know, whether you're looking for lot items or trying to get a good rate at a venue, whatever, you know, it's so prevalent in every aspect of your planning, being resourceful. So, you know, I've seen some interesting, you know, different incentives, and some of them are very cost effective. I saw it as a school once, that the adults or the parents on the table of the most active table, so the first table to you know, give 100% donations, all of those people were able to park in the teacher's parking lot, which sounds simple, but actually is really very cost effective. You know, it doesn't cost the school anything extra. But it's actually really handy for some of those teachers who are desperate to, some of those parents who didn't previously have parking and could utilize it for the next month or two. I can't remember how long it lasted, or I think there was another one where, I can't remember if it, just off the top of my head, I think it was actually the highest donation was allowed to become the headmaster. You know, their child was allowed to become the headmaster for a day, which is, you know, high risk, but again, very cost effective. It doesn't cost anything to provide that incentive, but it's a lot of fun, and it worked very well. You know, you had parents, you know, it's, you know, bidding and outbidding each other to have their child to become, you know, the principal.
Absolutely, and I think that all ties back quite nicely to, you know, the research you do beforehand and knowing your demographic. You know, all of these prizes and the fun you can have with the audience all does tie back into that research that you do, and, you know, knowing the demographic and knowing what will get everyone making those donations. So yeah, I think that worked well. So that's all from us. Hopefully there's a few points that you can take away from today, and you know, a few lessons that you can instill in your next fundraising event. Obviously, a massive thank you from us. If you have any questions, obviously do feel free to call or email us. Our email is on the screen now, us.inquiries@givergy.com, or visit us at givergy.com/fundraise. Obviously, the Twitter's already on there, so do feel free to email, call, or whatever with any questions. It's been a pleasure chatting. And hopefully talk you through an event soon.
Thanks very much for joining, everyone. I really hope that was useful to you. And again, this has been recorded, so this will be sent out, you know, following this webinar. And again, if you have any questions, please do fire them our way. We love what we do, and we absolutely love the challenge of helping you raise more. So we look forward to connecting.
Thanks a lot, everybody.